Go.
I'm Mike Toohey, author of Perpetual Upgrade, and I'm very thankful to the people at William Jessup University and Mettingen Journal for including me. And I'm going to read my little story here. Perpetual Upgrade. Can't you two behave at your own father's funeral? Ma resumed her sphinx pose, hands folded neatly in her lap, contemplating her coming solitude. Let me start that over.
Okay.
Perpetual Upgrade. Can't you two behave at your own father's funeral? Ma resumed her sphinx pose, hands folded neatly in her lap, contemplating her coming solitude. My sister and I briefly abandoned our childish efforts to make each other crack, but Liz possessed a sensitive nose and a big mouth. What's that smell? I pointed to a squat concrete structure off to the right. See that bunker? Uh-huh. Sewage lift station. It pumps poo. I blew the word on her cheek as a raucous motor kicked on. A fresh wave of fetid air washed over us. Ew, Liz shuddered. The buzz cut and piercings made her an unlikely candidate to provide grandchildren for Mom. Since going off to college, she came home each Christmas with a new piece of hardware lodged in her face. Were it not for the way it affected Dad, I would have ridiculed her. At the holiday meal, I ignored the pus and complimented her latest choice after Grace. Don't you know that he's looking down on us all right now? Ma looked so Catholic in her black mantilla. Even the vinyl upholstery of her wheelchair was an appropriately somber charcoal gray. I still refused to play along. Nothing new about that. Liz elbowed me and laid a hand on Mom's wrist. Sorry, I just don't understand why Daddy picked a plot near that thing. I looked around. Plenty of real estate remained at Willow Gardens. The Catholic section expanded along a ridge overlooking the duck pond.
Keep going, keep going.
It's supposed to be panning.
Oh! Let's start again.
Okay, Liz elbowed me and laid a hand on Ma's wrist. Sorry, I just don't understand why Daddy picked a plot near that thing. I looked around. Plenty of real estate remained at Willow Gardens. The Catholic section expanded along the ridge overlooking the duck pond, while the Jews advanced on the former orchard to the east. The intervening slopes held abundant land for miscellaneous Protestants. I'm betting it was cheap. Ma cleared her throat in her trademark preamble. Liz braced for the inevitable. I slipped a small flask from my breast pocket. Your father scrimped and saved to put you two through school. He wasn't about to squander money on a burial plot. I pretended to cough and took a sip of searing penance. He was a freaking saint. A hand on Mom's wrist. Sorry, I just don't understand why Daddy picked a plot near that thing. I looked around. Plenty of real estate remained at Willow Gardens. The Catholic section expanded along a ridge overlooking the duck pond, while the Jews advanced on the former orchard to the east. The intervening slopes held abundant land for miscellaneous Protestants. I'm betting it was cheap. Ma cleared her throat in her trademark preamble. Liz braced for the inevitable. I slipped a small flask from my breast pocket. Your father scrimped and saved to put you two through school. He wasn't about to squander money on a burial plot. I pretended to cough and took a sip of searing penance. He was a freaking saint. Perhaps a dozen mourners dribbled in over the next half hour, fitting easily underneath the green canvas canopy. Liz craned her neck. That's it? Like Dad had any friends. Liz pinched me hard. Bitch! My mother held up her scolding finger. Warren, that word. Ma, she pinched me. Liz adopted her playground voice. Ma, she pinched me. Well. You pinched like Dad did at church, you bull-dyke. She drew back as if slapped. He did that to you too? Left a freaking bruise, like fidgeting is a sin. She nodded. Really hard, like pliers? Okay, it made me cry, but I was what, 5? Liz sat back in her folding chair and stared straight ahead. You okay, sis? She bit her lip, or at least tried to. Her mouth was not as pliable as it should be. I thought he hated my singing. Ma sighed. Your father was not a patient man, but he wanted what was best for you. Liz whipped her head around. What do you mean, Ma? He'd say, you'll cry anyway if we have to sit 45 minutes in traffic. A wailing child is a ticket out of church. She waved a gloved hand. The funeral director nodded and mashed a button. Mournful organ music arose from the crappy tape deck speakers. I considered lifting the coffin lid and punching the smug, powdered face. There had to be some kind of payback. Not just for me, for Liz too. Too cheap to pay for an orthodontist when she needed it. Our father still managed to find money for golf. She went through high school afraid to smile while he delighted in titanium clubs. For Ma's sake, I kept my seat and took another drink. A fat Methodist preacher went through the motions with the enthusiasm of a night clerk at a cheap motel. The voice in my head supplemented the boilerplate eulogy. He was a good man. Yeah, good at doling out blame, good at making you feel he ruined his life. He was kind of an asshole. He loved his family. If by family you mean golf buddies. At the burial, my spirits rose as the box sank. Liz wrested the shovel from my grasp after the 10th spadeful. It's not funny, Warren. I want this over. Go move Ma out of the sun. She can't wheel on the grass. You know how easily she burns. It was difficult to read my sister's face with all that hardware pulling at the corners of her eyes and mouth. One thing I knew, she had not shed a tear. Neither had I. Ma clutched a string of beads in a trembling fist. I had never seen her with a rosary before. My father ridiculed her Catholic past. She began to cry. He wanted to be a better father, he just didn't know how. Liz handed her a wad of tissues. I'm sure he did his best. She nudged me with a little more force than necessary. Warren, you remember that summer he took us to the beach? Oh yeah, Beryl laughs. I silently recalled the thrashing for the bag full of rotting sand dollars I left in the car. Kept me out of Little League that season. Liz rolled her eyes but kept up the cheery facade. Remember how he wanted us to call him Uncle Bob instead of Dad? Ma balled up the rosary and sat upright. Were the girls on the beach? You don't remember, Ma? I maneuvered her into the shade of an enormous magnolia. I stayed at the motel the whole time. You know how easily I burn. Liz held up a finger. Sororities playing volleyball. I remember Dad coaching them. A flesh-filled picture formed in my mind. Those girls were so hot. Liz nodded. Were they ever? Sounds like you were really into them. Instead of pinching me, she put a finger to her lips and shook her head. Ma rocked slightly in her seat and stared at the gravesite. He told me he took his ring off to keep it from getting scratched. He took a flashlight to look for it on the beach. He was gone all night. Oh yeah, he wouldn't let us help. I had to stay in our room with my smelly sister. Liz nabbed the back of my arm. Why don't we go now? Beat the traffic. Ma went on. The next week, the phone call started. Business, he said. Like hell. Not at midnight. She looked at the beads in her cupped hand. I was a closet Catholic. That's why I could never divorce him. Liz shrugged. Well, you know, the vows just say, till death do you part. Ma looked up at me and pointed to a dark-clad man with a tufted beretta coming down the hill. I need to talk to Father Beggins. You know him, Ma? Your father thought it cheaper to get into heaven as a Methodist. I kept my options open. Cool. I pushed toward the black sedan where the priest changed into his loafers. Mrs. Arkwright, I heard about your dear husband. May God rest his soul. Enough about him, Father. She pulled out her purse. I just came into $500,000. What is it you need building? He did not miss a beat. Well, since you asked, we're 8,000 shy of our goal for the grotto. He produced a fundraising brochure. It will all be native stone. She glanced at the architect's rendering. Very old country. Count me in. She produced a checkbook and a pen. I was kidnapped and held prisoner by the Methodists 40 years ago. Will 10 grand get me back into God's good graces? The priest smiled. That and a heartfelt act of contrition. Can't say I remember all of it. She handed the man a check. Father Beggins' eyes widened. He reached into his cassock and pulled out a gilt-edged book bound in red leather. Take my missal. He admired the check for several seconds. Welcome back. I'll say an Evita for your husband. Suit yourself. Ma snapped her purse shut. Now what'll it take to get me a plot up in the Catholic section? I'm sure we can accommodate you. He gestured to his companion. Mr. Wilcox can help you with the financial arrangements. Mr. Wilcox took her hands and spoke solemnly. Plots start at $1,200 each. Perpetual care and a flush mount marker included. There will be a fee to have your husband disinterred. Ma gave a dismissive wave. Leave the old turd where he is. I'm going solo. Liz snorted like a pig and covered her bejeweled mouth. The priest turned away and busied himself in the trunk of his car, his thick body shaking. Mr. Wilcox remained composed. I'll have a contract ready for you Monday. Fine, she looked up at me. What's so funny? That was good, Ma. You've been holding back. I will edit this out. I lost my place. Please stand by. Oh! Okay. Let's go have lunch. Someplace nice. Not that crapiteria your father took me to every Wednesday. Oily meatloaf, soggy vegetables, syrupy tea. I want a steak and a highball. I know just the place. I reached into my vest pocket. Liz looked at me. I'll drive. I'm sober. I slid the flask back without taking a drink. The urge passed. I found myself more concerned with the swelling around her brow ring. You should have a doctor look at that. I have an appointment Tuesday. Liz pointed a finger at her own face and drew a circle. All this comes out. Then I'm getting braces. Ma clapped. Thank God I always hated that junk. My only comfort was that your father hated it more. As we helped Ma into the passenger seat, I gave my sister a wink. She gave my arm a squeeze. Firm, but not too hard. Cut!